All right, we're talking with Rachel Campos-Duffy here right after the event at Rocky Mountain College for the Young Americans for Freedom. Rachel, you talked a lot about feminism. What do you say are the differences between, the conservative women, the real feminists as you describe them, compared to, say, modern day liberal feminism?
I think modern day liberal feminism is very dogmatic, and so it tells women that there's a playbook, if you will. You have to do a certain amount of things. You can't believe certain things. I think Republican or conservative women in general tend to be more open to whatever the choices women make. So if that choice is to stay home and have kids, or work part-time, or be pro-life, or whatever it is, I think that there is just more option, more choices, more acceptance, more tolerance. And I guess I've felt like conservatives are more tolerant in general anyway, whether they're women or not. I find that the most tolerant people I know tend to be conservatives.
For the women that'll probably be listening to this interview while they're driving to work or maybe driving some kids off to school tomorrow morning, you gave a pretty compelling talk just about what it's like, because we know that women get pulled in a lot of different directions these days, and the liberal feminists out there might tell them that they're wrong for raising kids, but then there might be somebody else that tells them that they're wrong for going to work. How have you navigated that in your career, going from the real world of San Francisco to 8 kids? I can't believe that. I thought my grandma had a lot of kids with 7 kids, and
I beat your grandma.
That's right. But my grandma was a real feminist, but she raised 7 kids, and she ran a newspaper in a small town, and she's conservative.
Exactly. So what is the definition of a feminist, of an independent-minded woman? Your grandma sounds like somebody I'd really like, first of all, but she sounds like a very empowered and independent-thinking woman. She sounds tough. She works hard. She can manage a lot of different things. I think that's the definition most people have of what a feminist is. I think that it really comes down to choices. It comes down to respecting other people's choices, and also understanding that we're in an age where women have a lot of options. So, you don't have to be home and just home. A lot of women like the flexibility of being able to jump on and off of the career path as their families demand. And I think that should be celebrated a lot more than it is by the feminists who, frankly, historically have done a lot to move women forward. And now that we're here, ought to be a little more open-minded about that. I think it's really sad. I've met young girls on campus as I've traveled around the country, many of them, pursuing their degrees, but telling me almost secretly, I'm getting my degree, I'm happy I'm doing that, but the truth is I've always wanted to be a mom, and I feel guilty, like somehow they're betraying their feminist sisters by pursuing what they truly want. And I think the message to the young women that I spoke to today was just throw out that feminist script and just follow your heart, follow your passions, and understand that thanks to technology and so many cultural advancements, that you can be anything you want to be, and it doesn't have to be on some prescribed timetable handed out by the feminists.
People are already gearing up for 2020 and wondering what the presidential election is going to look like. What do you think's changed for women voters given the last couple of years under Donald Trump? And particularly, you talked about the Kavanaugh hearings and the Covington kids and the way the Covington Catholic kids were so falsely treated and by the media, especially in those beginning days of that controversy.
Well, I think there were a lot of moms in America who looked at what happened to the Covington situation and saw a young 16-year-old boy, and the way he was, just mistreated by the media. And this was just so unfair. And then, of course, when eventually the full footage came out, and thank God. Just imagine if there had not been the extended version of the clips that we saw, where we actually saw that these young boys were being harassed by adult men. They were being insulted and racially denigrated by these adults. And they actually acted, in the context of all the video, in a very honorable way, in fact. And yet, because the young man was white, because he was wearing a MAGA hat, because he was at a pro-life march, because he was Catholic, and all these factors, the left, the media felt like they could do whatever they wanted. They could really destroy this young man. And so my hope is that young man wins the lawsuits. The political implications you talk about with women are interesting. I think a lot of moms looked at this and thought that could be my kid. And I think that makes all of us pause about the sort of mob mentality on the left, the, take no prisoners, destroy people because of what they believe. I think it goes right back to this idea of tolerance, this myth of liberal tolerance. And I learned it very early. You mentioned the Real World. I learned it at 22 on the Real World when I went, to San Francisco with a really open mind, wanting to learn all about my roommates. I felt like I did that. And I realized at that very young, tender age that my liberal roommates were very hostile to my points of view. And frankly, they were not just hostile, they were angry that I dared to be a Hispanic, Latina American woman and have these points of view. They really wanted to put me in this box. And because of the color of my skin, because of my racial background, they felt like they could control what I thought and that I didn't have permission to think that way. And that always rubbed me the wrong way. And when I come to a place like this, to Rocky Mountain, and meet all these young American Foundation members that brought me here, I see a lot of independent-minded young people. It gives me hope for the future. I know that they're a minority on campus. They're also facing some of the things I faced as a young student and as a young woman. And I think that I'm really impressed. I think these are strong kids who are exploring different ideas, fighting to make sure those ideas are not stifled on campus, that they're not bullied for believing different things, and I think expanding tolerance and different ideas. So I'm really grateful I was brought here to give my point of view and hope that that others can learn from it.
Well, I really want to ask you also, we're talking with Rachel Campos-Duffy, Fox News contributor. I want to ask you about the Hispanic vote heading into 2020 as well, but I'll tell you what, we're going to catch up with you on the radio again one of these days.
Yes,
we'll talk with you over the phone.
Yes.
And we'll talk with you about the Hispanic vote in 2020 because you had some really interesting things to say on that front. But either way, great to have you here in Billings, Montana, and great to have some time to chat with you. Thanks.
Beautiful state. Thanks for having me.